Hi guys, welcome back to the Social Tune. And 2023 has been a pretty great year so far.
Welcome to my island.
Now that may surprise you if you've only been listening to the charts, which can charitably be described as shaky, but as for the album releases, it's at least as strong as 2020, maybe even 2021 at some points. In fact, it's the closest I've got to making a full mid-year top 30 since 2017, which is why if you head over to my blog, you'll find the first half of this list, listing the best albums of 2023 so far from 25 to 16. Highly recommend you check that out first. But I'm aware that that's apparently a controversial opinion, and that might be because 2023 hasn't been kind to all genres. Rap and metal have been relatively disappointing, pop has been, well again, shaky, and while country has been somewhat of the dark horse of this year, the real star is rock, which has had one of its strongest years in ages. And again, that's better displayed on the full list, but otherwise, let's not waste any more time and get started with number 15. This band has had a long and acclaimed career at this point, but there have always been naysayers, and I used to be one of them. And this one was no exception, arguably their most polarizing for fans and critics alike. But personally, as someone who hopped on that bandwagon extremely late, and even got to see them live earlier this year, this is a highlight in their discography. I've spoken to quite a few Paramore fans that aren't exactly huge on this album, and you know what, I do get it. The shift in sound is an acquired taste, straying a lot more into alt-rock and punk, and the content reflects it too, as Hayley Williams struggles with her own worldviews as well as those of her friends and family, weighing her own morals against her relationships with her loved ones. It's complicated, it's messy, it's stressful, which, side note, she doesn't always handle that well, but I think that's exactly why this worked so damn well for me. It's not as polished as After Laughter, but it is the natural follow-up. After all that collected posing and supposed maturity, life slaps you in the face and you realize you've still got nothing figured out. And that anger and frustration echoes across every song here. From the highest moments of rage to dejected despair to pure self-isolation for your own mental health. So yeah, it's a great album, one of my favorites from them. Number 14. But on the flip side, from the longtime veterans, let's praise some fresher blood. Look, this EP might only be 6 songs long, but it cemented Lovejoy as one of my favorite new rock bands around. I'd been vaguely aware of them for a while, but the singles leading up to this project were among some of the best songs that I'd heard all year. And once it dropped, the project itself didn't disappoint. The hooks are sharp, the rhythm section is fucking bananas, the bass and guitar melodies are some of the best that I've heard from any band in recent memory, and the lyrics and hooks are terrific. This is honestly one of those projects where the main issue is just how short it is. I want more. And while reportedly we can expect one more shorter EP before the full studio release, it's on the horizon. And considering that I'm also seeing them live in just a couple of days from now, I cannot fucking wait. Number 13. There are some albums on this list that I don't expect to see anywhere else. And while plenty of people simply didn't hear this, it's also very much a case of acquired taste. But in the modern landscape of pop, for whatever reason, this is an album that I couldn't stop coming back to.
Strawberry chainsaw, you're the treat. One day you're harsh and then you're sweet, and that's okay, that's fine with me. No woman ever could compete.
I know some people who outright hate this album, comparing its modern pop wear and tear to AJR trying to emulate the Beatles. And look, I'm not gonna pretend like I don't know where those people are coming from, but I also can't deny something this earnestly pathetic. This is a love story that immediately results in disappointment, followed by all 5 stages of grief, and eventually ends up on a sad, lonely, and utterly defeated note, which is less bitter towards the failed relationship than it is just baffled by his own dependency issues. And while Johnny Utah's nasal, whiny vocals are likely to drive many away, his unrefined delivery is a perfect match for the rickety, imperfect production, which gives all of these songs a burnished, lived-in feeling. Not to mention it's catchy as fuck. Again, easily one of the albums I've gone back to the most this year. Maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm just a hopeless romantic with emphasis on the hopeless, but this is one of the most underrated projects of 2023. And speaking of which, number 12. Because you know that there's one genre that gets overlooked more than any other, and that's indie country. Kind of baffling, honestly, considering the prominence of country on today's mainstream charts. But trust me, most of those artists have not got shit on this.
These days I'd kill 10 men a week for a minute as a kid on Carnegie. Time's a bitch, I wish I'd never known. Stop the clock and take me home.
Drayton Farley is actually an artist with several feathers in his cap already, as his last 2 albums were generally praised quite highly by both critics and his small fan base. But with this being his 3rd great album in a row, it's now a matter of principle. This man deserves way more credit than he's getting, and not just from the wider public, but from the critical community as well. Most reviews I've read about him compare him to a younger Jason Isbell, so of course I love him. But I think his songwriting honestly feels a little bit more timeless, coupled with gorgeously warm production and content about the rushing passage of time, leaving him breathless and left behind in its wake, wishing he could recapture some of those moments. In many ways, it's hard to even say that much more about it. It's just an incredibly mature album with excellent production and hooks for days. If you're a fan of country music, which again, more and more people seem to be getting on that bandwagon, please do yourself a favor and check this out. Number 11. This was a tough one for me, because the last time these two collaborated, it resulted in one of the best albums of the past decade. So going into it, my expectations might have been unreasonably high, but while I still don't think it's quite as good, Billy Woods and Kenny Siegel did it again.
Monsoon love, oxytocin flood, red mud ran out the hills like blood, glistening water bug on clean counter, plague mask gave the place a cursory glower.
To think that Billy Woods released something this dense after releasing 2 incredibly layered and tangled projects just last year is frankly just kind of stunning to me. He's been releasing music for about 20 years now, but his run in the last few years has been nothing short of insane, which has quickly made him a serious contender in a lot of conversations about who the best modern rappers are. But look, I've already praised him across a number of different lists, so let's give some love to Kenny Siegel, who really stepped up here, giving him a slightly more refined set of beats than he did on Hiding Places, and yet still no less rough sounding. It is the perfect match for Woods' vocals. It's like Blockhead and Aesop Rock. I can't think of another producer who works this well with him. Speak of the devil, Aesop also shows up here and is of course incredible, but I wouldn't even say he has the best verse here, as Quelle Chris, Elucid, and Shrapnel all show up to play, as well as Danny Brown, who honestly sounds better here than he did on the entirety of Scaring the Hose. I'll be curious to see how this ages over the course of the year, but right now, this is just some of the densest hip-hop that you will hear in 2023, following Billy Woods' emotional and physical journey across the world, making wry observations that I'm still stunned he can come up with this late into his career. So yeah, an incredible album, definitely a worthy successor. Number 10. There are some artists who have these rabid, passionate fan bases, but which critics seem to be a little bit more dismissive of, calling the content a little bit lightweight or the production a little basic. And again, I do get it, but in this case, no, I'm on the side of the people.
You know that I just don't know
Collapsed in Sunbeams isn't complex by any stretch, and the influences and the easy listening sound are nothing revolutionary, and yet Arlo Parks' sheer charisma and soft-spoken voice made that easily one of my most revisited albums of the 2020s so far. And she could have just made that again. After all, it would have satisfied the fans. But instead, Arlo Parks decided to take things in a much more progressive direction, pushing both her content and her sound, reportedly even pulling inspiration from acts like Fontaine's DC, and recruiting Phoebe Bridgers for a cameo that is so goddamn obvious and yet works so well. And while I can't say that this album is as easy of a listening experience as the last one, I respect the hell out of her for taking that risk, especially when it pays off in spades, making for a far more varied listen that is no less beautiful. Time will tell if this will end up fulfilling the same role for me as Collapsed in Sunbeams did, but so far, this is just as mesmerizing, if not even more so. Number 9. Okay, I'll admit that I'm late to praising this artist, but with everyone praising his latest release, now seems like a good time to hop aboard the McKinley-Dixon bandwagon.
Running from the guns, oh God, hardest part would be for me to stay down. Running from the guns breaks my heart if you decide to fly away now. Running from the guns, I am running from the guns.
I was impressed by For My Mama, Yada Yada Yada, but I found it pretty hard to revisit. An experimental jazz rap album which was really impressive but couldn't help but linger in the shadow of, say, To Pimp a Butterfly. But after a fantastic verse on that Soul Glow album last year, I knew this was a man that I wanted to keep on my radar. And while it's a much shorter project, only around 30 minutes in length, this new album delivered something much tighter and even more lush in its sound. There are multiple references here to Toni Morrison. The themes stray into the fondness for the system that he grew up in, even despite the fact that it's clearly broken, which he highlights brutally. And the jazz elements are just balanced so much better this time, easily making for one of the best produced albums of this year. And look, as of recording this, it's a very new listen for me, so we'll see how much I return to it in the coming months. But for now, this has been at the top of my workout playlist for the past 2 weeks, with just the right balance of sheer beauty and kick-ass motivation. If you haven't heard this yet, join every single critic out there and give it a listen. Number 8. I mean, of course this is here. I've been following Kesha's court case since the very beginning. I've never forgiven Dr. Luke for the torment that he inflicted on her over the past decade, nor Kimasabi, his record label she was on, for sabotaging her career at every turn, despite the fact that each and every album was winning more and more people over to her side. But with this being her final album on that accursed record label, she found a subtle-ish way to air it all out, resulting in her most progressive and bitingly honest album to date. While I'd hesitate to say there's any single song here as powerful as Praying, this album still manages to bring me to tears, as Kesha winds through messy portraits of misery and self-doubt, while still bringing it towards a place of healing by the very end, learning who her loved ones really are and so close to being finally free. And with some of her best songs ever, as well as some of the finest material that St. Vincent and Bjork never made, this is both critic bait at its finest, as well as one of the most cathartic expressions of anger and pain that all of we fans have been waiting for from her for so long. Good on you, Kesha. I hope you can finally enjoy your newfound freedom. Number 7. There are some artists out there who are silent killers, who for years put out really consistent and well-received work, but never completely blow you away. And yet one day they show up, whether by design or by complete accident, their album just clicks with you on a level that you weren't expecting, and you suddenly realize just how much talent they've been harboring all along.
Let's be like this forever, you'd say. And what is time in all this infinite space? I love you always.
Make no mistake, if you've heard a Karen Jonas album before, I don't think this one is going to change your mind. I mean, the building blocks are kind of the same as always. It's well written, oozing with self-confidence, and incredibly smart. Or in other words, it's just self-assured in a way that's downright sexy. But what I do think sets this one apart is the production and the framing of the content. Through a beautiful lens of what I believe we're calling dream country, the album very clearly goes through the motions of a free spirit who's just making the best out of life, flitting from relationship to relationship and enjoying every step of the way. And while it's clear a part of her is in it for the rush, there's clearly emotion at stake here too. As in the subtle moments where she does suffer rejection or heartbreak, she may not take it to heart on the surface, but it does eat away at her. And yet, she has more than enough self-confidence to process and then pick herself back up. It's just an incredibly secure album, about a woman who's so mature and clearly in her prime even when her life isn't perfect. It just makes me so goddamn happy every time I put it on. It's her best work to date, and a gorgeous album that I can stick on at any time. Number 6. I don't expect this to make anyone else's list, let alone this high. And yet, it probably should be. Because a good 5 years after I reviewed these guys on this channel, this band has finally lived up to their full potential and made their best album to date.
Is it okay if I say I'm not feeling alright? This is your life.
I've been a fan of this Irish group for years now, but it was really their 2021 single, Kids Don't End Up Like Me, that really won me over on how amazing they were. And yet even I could not have predicted this. I mean, based on the lead-off singles, I thought this was going to be a mess. A bunch of half-baked ideas with zero concept or fixed identity. And yet once the album came out, those loose ideas made for one of the most fun and varied listens of the entire year. And besides, it's still goddamn great. A very mature and self-reflective set of lyrics, which is just icing on the cake for an album whose sound just pulls me in so damn easily. Sure, there are definitely some obvious Beach Boys and Strokes influences in there, but the band has a strong enough identity to make those sounds their own, pulling them into a modern context and making some of the most fun and catchy music you will hear. I know a lot of people haven't heard this or just plain ignored it when it dropped, but seriously, I cannot recommend the Academics' new album highly enough. Number 5. And speaking of artists finally living up to their full potential,
But here I am thinking, what if Michael Keaton killed himself in multiplicity? Would that be genocide?
I'll admit that it took me a while to warm up to Rustin Kelly. When he first appeared onto the scene, I could not separate him from his wife, Casey Musgraves, a singer whose general approach to country was far more in my wheelhouse. Well, cut to 5 years later, and after a long and public divorce, the two's current musical directions could not have changed more, with neither of them doing country anymore. But while Casey's output has dwindled significantly in quality, Rustin Kelly is making some of the best indie rock I've heard in recent memory. And I bring up all that baggage because while Shape and Destroy was the insecure stage setter, whose lyrics almost feel prophetic looking back at them now, the weakness is a direct consequence of said divorce, as Rustin Kelly goes through the stages of grief post-breakup, with some pathetic lows that he's clearly trying not to hit more than once. It's a shockingly human, self-aware, and revealing album, where even after he moves on and gets together with a new partner, it doesn't last. He realizes that he still has stuff to work on. In other words, it's an album about heartbreak and recovery. And it's honestly hard to say which of the two is messier, especially when it doesn't exactly end on a happy note. But with his best collection of songs to date, along with some of the most cutting songwriting of his entire career, I mean, I don't quite know if it reaches the absolute highs of his last album, but it's a far more complete listening experience as a whole, as well as one that really made me take stock of my own relationship. In the best ways, of course, if only to show what not to do. And he did it all for the sake of self-improvement Thank you, Rustin Kelly. This mustn't have been easy to share, but I really appreciate that you did, and you made me an all-in fan. Number 4. Occasionally, an album drops that's just so goddamn beautiful that it's hard to know what else to even say. Karen Jonas was my go-to example for this for the longest time, but hers wasn't quite the best.
How come you never get mine, but your feelings outside? How come you never get angry? How come you never get sad?
Seriously, shout out to Ryan from Not Real Music for putting me on to this, because the fact that this album is flying under many people's radars is a goddamn crime. This Portuguese-Canadian artist burst onto the scene with one of the most beautifully arranged and poetic albums that I've heard in ages. One that's just drenched in her culture, with touches of flamenco, very subtle rhythm sections, and splashes of horns, maracas, bells, strings, and really most organic folk instruments you can think of. And each one is used precisely and gorgeously. The sound of this album is enough to stun anyone. It's like looking at a finely woven artistic tapestry, but paired with Nico's stunning honeyed vocals that sing in a mix of English, French, and Spanish, along with some incredibly well-balanced backing vocals and multi-tracking. The atmosphere this album cultivates is simply captivating, weaving tangled stories of love and strife, but all with the goal of making this love story work out, to make it the best one ever, even with all the trials and tribulations along the way. It's just one of the most endearing and easy listens of the year so far, and one that a lot more people need to be checking out. Number 3. At one point, there was some serious competition for the top of this list, and for the longest time, I thought this album was going to be the one to do it, especially after I saw her perform live earlier this year. But although other albums have grown on me just a little bit more over the past months and even weeks, there's no denying that Billy No Mates needs to be a household name.
I just came out of spite. I didn't come here to try to put things right. Don't you push me, you know I just might. I only came out of spite.
It's rare for an artist to capture me with their voice alone, but Billy No Mate's husky tones and gobsmacking rock star presence are impossible to ignore. A stage presence on par with anyone we've mentioned so far, Billy No Mates leads you down a hallway of dejected self-reflections in the midst of a very lonely and toxic relationship, where it seems like society itself is built to make her fail. And even when it doesn't get in the way of her happiness, she sure as hell will do it to herself. It's an incredibly self-reflective album with too many quotable lines to count, all accompanied by a wonderful blend of organic and synth-based instrumentation, which matches her Stevie Nicks-esque vocal stylings with some of the most stunning genre bending that I've heard in ages. From folk to alt-rock to punk to even some country elements, all of which she rides with the ease of a seasoned veteran. This is a woman of stunning talent and phenomenal writing chops. Please, please, please give this a listen. I promise you, you won't regret it. Number 2. Okay, if you want underground, try an album that, as far as I can tell, doesn't even have any physical copies available. Which sucks, because this is one of the most stunning country albums that I've heard this decade.
Diamonds on forever. Hearts can change like the weather.
It's been a long time since I found a throwback album that resonates with me this strongly. Because yeah, if you trace back the sound, the production, even Amanda Field's sweet vocal delivery, you can easily draw parallels to 50s acts like Patsy Cline. And yet she does those sounds such justice that it honestly feels like a time capsule that's just recently been discovered. And while major props need to be given to producer Megan McCormick for making this sound as organic and stunning as it does, the songwriting is also just devastating. As much like Rustin Kelly, Amanda Fields traces out the steps of a fictional ? Divorce, except where he very much deals with the aftermath of that breakup, she leads you through it in real time. From her unhappy relationship to him cheating on her, ultimately being blindsided by the divorce and then giving up all of her pride and begging him to take her back. But ultimately, after all that bargaining, she moves on to some form of happiness. It's such a vivid and heartbreaking listen that you can't help but root for her, which is why when she ultimately finds that moment of self-acceptance, it hits all the harder. I have fully bawled my eyes out to this album multiple times this year, and while the sound may take some adjusting to on first or second listen, it's a near perfect piece of work that deserves, well, mountains of acclaim. Wink. And yet, there was somehow a better album that came out before June was over. But before that, here are some excellent individual songs that you need to be checking out as well.
It'll be okay, even if you're feeling like there ain't no way. You're still with us today, it's gonna be okay.
We used to be rain catchers, and we couldn't see what we were running from. Claramente es igualita que tú. Why don't you come over? Red wine supernova. Why would you leave me here? Why would you go?
And I wish you the best. It's time to leave, 'cause I failed the test. So take the low road, take the high road, take whatever road you're on.
Baby, if you like it, just reach out and pick it.
I wanna feel all the love that I can face. I wanna dance with me out of a hurricane. Oh, back up me saying be alright. Your face is so perfect like CGI. Driving a football to the legs of shore. 7 ways that you can eat your young.
See my side and your side never symmetrical. See my highs and my lows will keep me level though. Oh, I don't wanna burn out, baby. So why can't I stay a while when I have her on my mind?
Yeah, it was love, then it was just married.
The jewel runners, the product of many cruel summers. And the description was fitting, they say it's two gunners.
I went to Paris, Texas, with a suitcase in my hand. Until I fall back in. Love is karmic, yeah, it works through reincarnation.
Slightly underpowered, with an overload of green. It is you I'm heading to with this big machine.
'Cause we don't wanna be the 1%. We're not built to last, we're just young men.
I was suffering more than I let on. The tropic morning news was on.
I'm a little bit homesick, but I don't wanna go home yet, 'cause I don't think that I'll come back.
Ever since you walked in, starting to feel like
You're once in my life.
I keep hearing voices drowning out the sounds. La 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 la.
'Cause I'm a woman, I'm a very fucking brave, strong woman, and I'll be damned if I let a man ruin. Send me my love from the other side of the apocalypse. It was those late nights in Soho, I knew I'd lost my heart to you.
Oh shit, this galley on me one tack, what did she think? She started on me with a pack, give me a pack, then hop on the stick.
Sorry to the fans who say I changed. Cause I did, sorry you don't know me on a personal level to pinpoint what it is.
What's an empty tuxedo supposed to do?
And now, number 1. As I said, at one point, I wasn't sure what was going to top this list. Then a couple of weeks ago, an album dropped. One that I was highly anticipating, sure, but I never thought it was going to be as good as it ended up being. From an artist who has never once missed a year-end list of mine when he's released a project that year. And yet in 2020, 10 years after Southeastern, Jason Isbell delivered yet another perfect classic.
Swear you'll save the world when I lose my grip. Tell me you're in control.
Believe me, I definitely wasn't ready to call this a perfect album on first listen. It took multiple sittings and several hours for me to realize just how flawless this was. Because even the releases that I wasn't entirely sure of leading up to the project work perfectly in the context of the album. It's about maturity, growing up and letting go of the past, both in terms of traditions and old habits. Recognizing not just the flaws of a system that he has been a part of, but also his own lingering character flaws that he's still processing. There are multiple points where this album gets uncomfortably real, specifically when addressing the toxic side of his relationships with his wife and daughter. And yet the fact that he's willing to lay it all bare without giving himself much of an escape or an excuse shows that he's clearly trying to be better. This isn't glorification or wokeism for the sake of posturing, or even a takedown of masculinity like some people have framed it. No, instead it's a deeply personal and self-reflective album. Jason Isbell has always been good at self-analyzing, but this is the album where he pulls the fewest punches, whether through personal anecdotes like Middle of the Morning and When We Were Close, or parables where the commentary is so poignant when you keep the central themes in mind, and where the songwriting isn't just great, it's some of the best that he's put out in years, resulting in some of his finest work since Elephant, ranging from not-so-veiled racism in Conservative Values, to the hidden horrors of foster care, to complicated feelings surrounding a partner's abortion, to kings toppled and left out to dry as their reign comes to an end. Seriously, I've never shied away from putting Jason Isbell in my top 10 songs of the entire year. In fact, if you look at 2015, 2017, and 2020, he's there every single time. But this might be the album where he has the most individual songs contending for the Song of the Year, where I'm barely certain I can even identify a top 3 for this video, let alone the order. It's just rare that I come across an album this fucking flawless, where every single listen gives me more to unpack, and the 70s Americana throwback influences are stronger than ever, while still managing to sound defiantly modern and current. As a fan, I simply can't fault him for any of this. It's everything I didn't even know I still wanted from him. And so, without a doubt, this is my album to beat in 2023, and I'm not the only one to say it. Hope you guys enjoyed. Again, check out the first half of the list over on my blog. Don't forget the Spotify links in the description of this video. And if you had a good time, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, as well as sharing your favorite albums of this year down in the comments below. Take care, everyone, and until the next time, I'm Finn, and this is the Social Tunes signing off.